that's not the point. The point is this topic needs to be discussed, and I'm proud to have it discussed at Orton Hospital. This is someone that I've heard speak before at our medical society meeting. He really has a lot to say, and I urge you to listen to him carefully. He is the chairman of the Committee on Child Abuse and Domestic Violence of the State Medical Society, and that's the capacity in which I asked him to come speak at our medical society meeting. He's also an attending physician at Montefiore Hospital and Medical Center in North Central Bronx Hospital, and he will speak on the role of the healthcare professional in domestic violence. The rest of what he will say, I will let him outline for you. The other speakers that we will have tonight are Myrna Rivera-Plotsky, who is community educator for Orange County Safe Homes, and David McDermott, co-director and co-founder of Batterers Intervention Program, Incorporated. So, without taking up any more time, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Howard Schwartz.
Thank you so much, and I must say that I really am happy to be with you here tonight. About 10 years ago, such a meeting would have been unthinkable. In fact, in Bronx County, about 10 years ago, some of us were very concerned about some of the problems we were having in child abuse, that there seemed to be no solution from the physician standpoint, because any time there would be a suspicion, the child would be removed from our own practices, and there was no opportunity for follow-up. And so when I raised the issue, well, how about domestic violence? Maybe we want to study that issue. At least the person's going to remain, because there is no reporting mechanism in domestic violence. There's only a reporting mechanism in child abuse. Well, there is no reporting mechanism today in domestic violence. And perhaps that's good, perhaps it's not. I won't address that issue tonight because it's a very highly controversial one. Some people ask the question about, well, what can doctors really do? After all, what does the doctor really do in trying to solve such a complex problem? At the State Medical Society, our committee has a theory which I think is viable, and that is the first thing that a doctor can do, and the doctor can also alert the staff that the doctor supervises what they can do, of the secretaries, the nurses, the other physician extenders, the other physicians in the clinics, wherever they may be, at least to become sensitized that this is a real problem. And if it's a real problem, we really can put aside the time to identify a person who has been victimized. They follow the very same patterns that you would expect. First of all, you would not expect such a person to be proud of the fact that there's battering taking place. The description of how an injury occurred and the observations that a doctor makes, the pattern is very clear again. There's always a discrepancy between the actual injuries that are observed and the description of how such injuries took place. There's no way that a simple fall could have produced the kinds of injuries that we see. 1 out of every 4 surgical presentations to an emergency room on the women's presentations are from domestic violence. 1 out of 4. Now, what is the cost to the system? Is 3 kinds of costs. The healthcare cost may be large, but it's not as large as the cost to society. Yes, there are repeating visits to the emergency room and to doctor's offices. Multiple complaints are made. Nothing special is found, and sometimes something is found that requires further follow-up. But from the healthcare system point of view, there is no follow-up when it becomes serious, because part of the abuse pattern is not just an issue of hurting or injuring, but it's also denying services that are needed by that person, and trapping and holding that person hostage financially, hostage physically, in many different ways that are very hard for presentation at this type of a group at this time. Before I go further in this discussion, I'd like to know how many in this group are physicians? Okay, how many are nurses? Are there social workers in the group? Okay. Law enforcement? Okay. Emergency medical technicians? Okay. With the distribution that's here tonight in the various categories in which you are, the generic view of the healthcare cost is relatively small as I said before, relative to the societal cause, because we have absenteeism from work. We have the problems of recurrent absenteeism from work, alcoholism, drug abuse. And who are the real victims in the process are not those who are being injured, but the ones who see the injuries, namely the children. As you grow up into a family where abuse becomes the first approach to the resolution of a difference of opinion, do you expect that child 30 years later to learn that there are other ways of doing things? Very unrealistic. A child growing up in an environment that learns that beating is the way you resolve an argument, it's very difficult to teach that person many years later in adult life that that's not the only option that you have. So what is it that a physician can do in this whole cycle besides teaching staff, besides sensitizing one another, besides holding conferences? One is to know that resources do exist for both the victim of violence, but also for the batterer, that these programs do need funding, and there's an obligation to assist if they're going to be of assistance to the patients, and the community has an obligation to support these. But at least to let the victim know that such resources do exist. We caution each and every physician in the course of our training never to tell a victim to leave the marital scene, never to leave the home. We don't permit advice to be given because the risks of damage to that person are very real if they stay, but even more real if they leave, unless the leaving is done in a very highly planned way, highly structured, so that there is a specific destination on the other end which will be safe. The mere leaving presents the threat of even further damages because the abuser is highly insulted, very sensitive that the person who has been enslaved, has been a hostage, has now escaped. We have enough history in the world's populations in all countries that no country, no person, no family was ever pleased or happy if a victim is freed without leaving with paying certain dues. And hostages leaving or escaping, not a very pleasant scene. They're not dealt with very kindly, or prisoners in concentration camps. Similarly, the kinds of threats that the women may have, who are the most frequent victims, as physicians see this person, merely allowing the person to know that alternatives do exist, but not to order the person to take advantage of that potential help, but merely alerting them that it does exist. If there is a follow-up, it's appropriate to ask the question, did you take advantage of what we said last time? If the answer is no, the answer is no. Doctors are accustomed to giving orders. We give orders to nurses. We give orders to patients. We live our life this way. We try to control diabetes. We control hypertension. We try to control disease. We control the people who work with us. Our entire lives are built around control. And so this person, who has already lost control in her life, who comes to us for help, naturally we try to control that person as well. Because this is our habit, this is our training, this is the way we conduct our work, whether we be surgeons, psychiatrists, orthopedists, general physicians. This is our orientation. It's very difficult to teach physicians and to sensitize them that it is not our job to now control the person who's already lost control. Our job is to enlighten, hoping that they someday will reach the point where they can be empowered, but not to deal with them as we deal with our usual and customary diseases. Such individuals whose needs are not being satisfied in health care frequently become litigants. Frequently they become plaintiffs. And frequently they will sue physicians, they will sue surgeons, they will sue hospitals, and very often they will win, but not on the issue of violence. They will sue on an issue where their legitimate medical conditions were overlooked, because after a while in chronic depression with somatization, hypochondriasis, unless a physician is sensitized to recognize that this is a post-stress traumatic disorder, and this syndrome has causes of the symptoms become ignored. At a telephone call, that abdominal pain last night was experienced gets interpreted as, well, this week it's abdominal pain. Now, last week it was a headache. The week before that, she had a fracture of an arm. and legitimate illnesses such as appendicitis, ruptured gallbladders, and other legitimate illnesses will be overlooked. And it's that concern that we have at the Medical Society of the State of New York to teach our physicians to become aware that if the person's needs are not being satisfied, and if there is the potential that they are a victim, such an individual requires additional time during the course of a session. Even though the physician's schedule is overloaded, arrangements can be made, if not on that day, perhaps the next day, but we have ways of providing time where it's necessary. However, if the physician is not sensitized, the response of the physician is anger towards the person who has a problem for which the physician cannot control, and this cycle of mismatch does produce other medical damages, which I did say before, will ultimately end up in court. In response to all this turbulence, the American Medical Association has formed a national coalition of physicians against family violence and has invited not only physicians and nurses, social workers, all interested personnel to join this national coalition to learn about not just child abuse and child sexual abuse, domestic violence, now also elder abuse, and elder abuse becoming yet a new area of concern to health practitioners. And if anyone would like more information about this, I encourage you to talk to me afterwards, and I'll give you additional information on how to get more knowledge about this. The Medical Society of the State of New York, in response to the massive, overwhelming momentum that has come along to encourage health practitioners to get involved, is now in a very fortunate position because each and every emergency room in every hospital in the State of New York is required, as well as other states throughout the country, the emergency room personnel are required to have training programs in the identification, treatment, and follow-up of abuse victims. This is now mandated by the national accrediting organizations, and these national accrediting organizations checking up on hospitals require that the emergency rooms demonstrate the effectiveness, including Horton Memorial Hospital emergency room. The physicians are actually trained specially to deal with these problems. Each and every county medical society, 61 county medical societies throughout the state of New York, have resource information regarding batterers intervention programs, shelters, rape crisis centers, so that for physicians, as well as the general public, the county medical societies can serve as an additional resource. None of this could have taken place unless there would be a legitimate societal need to pursue this direction. And I think that in the presentations you're going to hear tonight, you'll recognize that not only is there a need, but we really can make a difference. When I was first a physician, if I would ever bring a problem like this to some of my professors, that I think that this particular person's been beaten up by the husband, they'd say, Dr. Schwartz, please, this is not your concern. This is not our concern. What happens in the home is beyond the scope of what a doctor should become concerned with. We're seeing a very, very major change. Now, we're asking physicians, yes, this really is our problem. It is society's problem. But we can't do the job alone. We must work together with one another. The New York State Office for Prevention of Domestic Violence, together with the auxiliary of the Medical Society of the State of New York and the Medical Society, are now joining together to form a new type of hotline similar to the poison control model. As you're aware, if a child has a suspected poisoning, come to an emergency room or call a doctor's office. One telephone call away, you have an immediate contact with a resource person at the hotline, and that individual has a whole set of consultants available who can give additional advice to them and also to the family what to do in this case of possible poisoning. Similarly, we are now setting up a statewide center with a poison control model, but for the issue of domestic violence, so that if one of our physicians has such a problem, at least they know that they have the statewide hotline. It will not be open to the general public. It will only be available through the physicians. But this is what we as physicians are doing to address the issue at large. I don't want to take up too much of the time. I'd like to go on to the next speaker, but thank you very much.
what I'm going to be doing tonight is explaining to you the dynamics, the definition of domestic violence, and our famous question is, why do women stay or return? Okay, because that's what everybody asks. Well, I told her where to go and where to get help, but she's still not doing it. So we're going to take a quick run on that. Okay, domestic violence, the definition of that is that it's anyone who uses physical, psychological, emotional, sexual abuse to maintain power and control over a current or a past intimate relationship, partner. What happens is that these partners use these things constantly. And what we do is that a lot of times the women feel and blame themselves because of that power and control. And inside your packets, you'll see the power and control wheel. And it's self-explanatory. And not to take up a lot of time in that, you'll read all the different types of abuse. One of the things that is important for you to know, that this happens in both heterosexual and homosexual relationships. The dynamics are identical. So we have to be also alert when someone of the same sex comes in and says, well, this person, I live with them and they got injured. Just don't take it and say, well, this is a friend helping the person. Okay? And domestic violence comes from many, many, many years ago. It came from the common law doctrine. Okay? And that was the rule of thumb. The rule of thumb is that you could beat your wife with a stick not thicker than your thumb. And you couldn't beat her past 8 o'clock at night and except Sundays. Okay? And that was the rule. And that came from England, and it came to us, with the migrating people. And it came to the United States, and a few states adopted that law also. Okay? Then, in the 1800s, North Carolina Supreme Court said you no longer could beat your wife. And that was the new rule. And this is where we get behind closed doors. That saying that this is behind closed doors, this is not our problem. And what happened was that the Supreme Court then stated that you couldn't beat your wife, but if it was done behind closed doors, the curtains were drawn, your neighbors didn't know what was going on, and your wife wasn't missing a limb or was seriously injured, it was acceptable. So as long as you met those criteria, it was okay. In today's society, we also still have that is very, this is an acceptable way of handling somebody and maintaining that power and control. In today's society, what we see is women's magazines telling Cosmopolitan, New Women's Magazine, all telling us what we could do to change ourselves to make that relationship better. Okay? Sports Illustrated, Popular Mechanics, Penthouse or Playhouse don't run these articles. And the only people who read these articles are women. So again, society is putting the guilt and the responsibility on the women. Okay, so that hasn't really changed that much. We still are held responsible for what goes on in our relationships. Okay. Then we always ask ourselves, why do these women stay, and why do they why do they return when we give them information? Well, it's very easy for us who are out of that family and looking into this problem, for us to tell someone what to do and how to do it. Except we have to go one step beyond. That a lot of times, economically, these people cannot survive. The victims, it's very hard for them to survive. You talk about a woman and 2 children, and she leaves the home, and she decides that she's had it, and she needs help financially. Well, social services provides $485 a month for her to survive on. And that's to pay rent, that's to pay for anything else that food stamps won't cover, their gas, electricity, their phone. You're not going to find an apartment out there for less than $485. And if you do, it's probably falling apart. And that is not in the greatest neighborhood where you would like to raise your children. So that's one of the reasons why, one of the main reasons why these women do stay. Okay? The other things is by professionals. When someone calls the police and tells them to come, that this is somebody is, having a problem in their household, and they need the police there because of the screaming and they feel somebody's injured or whatever the case may be. A lot of times the attitudes are, well, what did you do to make him this angry? It's just telling the victim that she might, that she did something wrong. And then she starts looking at herself and starts saying, well, maybe if I didn't say this, if I didn't nag him about the leaky faucet, if I didn't tell him, when he told me to shut up, I should have shut up, I wouldn't have gotten hit or just put down. Okay? A lot of these victims have no self-esteem because they're constantly being put down with their emotional abuse. They're constantly being told that they're worthless, that they are not capable of making decisions on their own, that if they do make a decision, it's going to be wrong. A lot of times, these women are not even allowed to go and out in the community and join groups or anything, because anything that would give that person support is taken away from them. Sometimes they isolate them from their family also. And what they do is you ask yourself, how could somebody be isolated from their family? Well, a lot of times family will call, then he'll tell them, well, we have to leave the house now. When her family comes, nobody's there. And then they feel that she knew that they were coming, so why are they not there? She obviously doesn't care. But he never told her. So we have to remember that a victim is very much alone. She really doesn't have anyone. Even though you offer things, unless you really, she feels comfortable with you, she's not going to open up to you immediately. Okay? A lot of times also, these women would like to get jobs, or they would like to go to school, get an education, get a job training or something, so they could also help out in the family. Well, they're not allowed to do those things. We have clients sometimes that can't even write out a check because they've never seen one. Because every time they go to the store, every time they go to the doctors, anytime they do anything, the husband is there to write out that check. Okay? The reason why we always put we talk about batterers as being the husband is because 95% of the times is male. The batterer is the male. Okay? It's the #1 causing injury to women. You could combine car accidents, assaults, or muggings, or rapes all together. And it still doesn't come up to the number of women who are being injured every day. Okay? The statistics are that 10 women every day in the United States are being killed by their husbands or boyfriends. Okay? So it is a very serious problem. Also, these women are constantly told that they're going crazy. You'll find that some of the women will come to you and, like Dr. Short said before, they'll complain about headaches and anxiety attacks, and that they have a lot of stress. But in reality, is that they don't know what else to say to you about what's really going on in their household. Okay? It's that secret. You know, years ago, we never spoke about child abuse, and it's more open. DWI is the best comparison. Years ago, people didn't get arrested, people didn't go to court because of DWI. But people got more educated, people really started changing, and now you find it less than what you did years ago. And hopefully we'll do the same changes for the domestic violence victims, okay? And make other people see that this is very serious. Sometimes these women are put in a mental institution, okay? Because see, a lot of times these women become hysterical. The police will come to their house and he'll be nice and calm and she'll be hysterical and acting, you know, wild and a lot of times screaming. So the police sometimes what they'll do is they'll take them in and say, okay, she should be evaluated. And he helps, you know, put her in. Sometimes doctors might prescribe antidepressants, volumes, and then the husband, when she comes in with the prescription, he'll say, I told you there was something wrong with you and that you were going crazy. They wouldn't have given you this if that wasn't the case. So sometimes all these things help that woman stay in that situation. Also, women stay for religious reasons. Okay? A lot of times is that their clergyman tells them that they have to have faith and they should pray a lot and they should be there for their husbands and help them through this problem. Okay? Sometimes their family say, you know, he might do this to you, but at least you have a home, you have a car. What more do you want? He makes sure that there's food on the table. He pays the bills. So sometimes you have to take, you know, one bad quality against all the others. And this is family telling her this. Okay? Sometimes we raise our children. Those who have girls, we tell our girls how important it is to be married. I mean, when a child, a boy falls down and scrapes his knee, we're very fast in saying, you know, stop crying, you're a big boy. Boys don't cry. When a girl falls, we pamper them, we cuddle them, and take care of them. Okay? Sometimes in the older group, in the dating community, we have a third of our dating community who's in an abusive relationship now. And we're talking about Orange County. But that also applies to the United States. But in Orange County, a third of our community, you know, our dating community, our kids from junior high to high school are in that abusive relationship. We have 1 out of every 6 students who graduate high school will be in a violent relationship. Okay? That's a lot of students. And when we say violent relationship is because there was a lot of physical abuse in that relationship. We're not talking about the emotional, the psychological. That's still part of it. But the violent part is, you know, she was raped or physically abused severely. Okay? When they're dating, if you talk to your daughters and your sons and you ask them the question, if a boy dates 5 girls, what do you consider him? A lot of times they'll tell you he's the stud, they wish that they were in his shoes, and he's so lucky because he gets away with these things. If a girl, in turn, does this, she's considered a slut. But yet, both parties are being disrespectful to the other partners. and they're both hurting other people's feelings. There's really no difference. But yet, we see it differently. So we help them grow up in that, train of thought. Okay? Also, we need to let our kids know that it's not acceptable. A lot of times we get calls from young girls whose ribs have been broken or fractured because they were wrestling and it was an accident. And what happens is that sometimes they do the hand playing and the roughing around in the schools and stuff, and then all of a sudden something serious happens, and then he'll say, well, honey, I really didn't mean it. It was an accident. I didn't know my own strength. So that's how they cover it. Also, sometimes the adults, when they come into the emergency room, this is a way of covering. I fell down the stairs. Or, I walked into the door, and that's how I broke my nose. And they always find excuses. Because these are things that they already have planned. They've made up that story. So we have to be careful with those things. Also, with the sexual abuse, a lot of times people feel, well, if they're married or have had sex with that partner before, they cannot be raped or sexually abused in any way because we've had that contact already. Except since 1984, a husband can be charged with rape. It was overturned that before the law used to state that it was the exception of a husband. And now, that's no longer. A wife can charge her husband with rape. And a lot of times people don't understand that there's that no, that big word no, that at one point, somewhere, you don't feel like doing something, you don't have to. A lot of people feel that they're obligated to. And they're talked into having sex. But deep inside, they really don't want to. And until they talk to us and we sit down with them and explain to them, they really don't realize what had happened to them. A lot of times I've had women who've been through the hospital for injuries but never had mentioned that they were also raped. And usually when they come to us and we start talking to them and letting them know the different types of abuse, then they'll say, that happened that night. But that was my husband, so I didn't know. So the more we are aware of all the things that these women can go through, the better we'll be in responding to them. And I'll turn it over to Eileen Maddock, and she'll continue.
Our next speaker is a woman who wishes that her name not be used. She is a formerly battered woman. And I think she will, by herself, be proof to you, fighting the stereotype, well, a battered woman must be poor, she must be of color, she must live in the slums of New Bern or Middletown, she can't be a middle-class woman, when in reality just the opposite is true. I think she will also show you what role as healthcare professionals you can take to make a difference for battered women. And also, as Myrna discussed, that all the things that keep a woman, a battered woman in her situation, never forget she is the expert. And it is so easy to step back and say, well, if you just do steps 1, 2, and 3, your life will be fine. She is the expert on the situation. Your role can be to give advice, to give information, never, never to order something. So,
as a formerly battered woman, I have been into the emergency room on many occasions, and I had always stated that I had fallen. And not once had my injury or, the injury I had sustained was questioned, though one of the injuries had been a dislocated jaw. The medical staff never really further questioned me. They just accepted my excuse as a fall, that's what it was. They never questioned or even ordered further examining me, like my legs for bruises on my legs if it was a fall. They just accepted that the dislocated jaw was a fall. And I'd just like to say now that the medical staff, you're in the best position as far as helping a battered woman. Being a compassionate ear, offering her empathy, and just an understanding person just to listen to her for a few minutes. She may not open up right away, but she will open up sometimes if you can offer that empathetic ear. By just questioning the injury that she stated she came from a fall, I'm not saying crying in any way, but just offer that empathy. That's one of the best ways I can honestly, because I did have one doctor when I was pregnant, when he beat me up when I was pregnant, separate me from the batter when I had the baby. He had enough wisdom and knowledge to say, stay away from her. And he recognized it, and he also offered some counseling afterwards for me. Soon after that, I separated from my husband when I had that supportive physician step in and help me and offer that it wasn't all my fault. And a lot of times you will find that the battered woman will blame herself. She's shameful. She has a lot of shame because he tells her she deserves it. And she actually believes she does deserve it. But if you could just meet her that way, just halfway, and tell her that no one deserves to be abused, you'd be surprised the response you'll get. I'd just like to bring up this point. During the years of 1930 and even up into the 1970s and the 80s in this country, falling was the most reported injury in American homes. Now we're finding out it's domestic violence. Another thing I'd like to add is not to judge the woman for being in the situation. If even you suspect it and you want to question her, please don't be judgmental towards her, because a lot of times she is fearful of leaving the situation, that she'll even, she'll get more injuries once she leaves the hospital if it's found out that she's been battered. Or, like I said, shame is another factor involved. A lot of times the woman's blaming herself that a good woman wouldn't be getting beaten up. That has nothing to do with it, being a good woman. Because a lot of times the woman is trying to please the batter, and there's no way of pleasing the batter because his behavior is a learned behavior. And this is how he's learned to control her, with the power of control. I'd like to end this. Just try to be compassionate towards the woman. If you even suspect domestic violence, be compassionate, empathetic, offer her that ear. Nursing is a field where, it's a caring field. Be that for that woman. That's all I can say. Thank you.
What you as healthcare professionals, social workers, nurses, doctors, EMTs can do to appropriately assess for domestic violence and appropriately intervene in a domestic violence situation. In your packets, you'll see a protocol. This was put out by the March of Dimes. It is wonderful. I encourage you to read it 1, 2, 3, 4 times. Every time I read it, I find something new. Okay? Some of the more targeted things in this publication, it was a study done on pregnant women. However, it is applicable for all battered women. 1 in 12 women who are pregnant are battered. We now have the ability through DNA testing, genetic testing, to know pretty much what the cause of a birth defect is. So what explains all those birth defects and learning disabilities and emotional disabilities, which we can't track to DNA? A good portion of them are caused by battering while she's pregnant. Battering frequently begins or intensifies during pregnancy because you're dealing with a batterer who's saying, I am king of the hill, I will get everything my way. And now she has a bond with this thing that he cannot see. And where she may have been very much, for very good reasons, trying to make him happy and do everything perfectly, she's going to step back from that and be there more for her, for the fetus and for herself. One of the most important things when dealing with a case where you believe there's domestic violence, and I'd just like to say both I and this publication advocate assessing all female patients for domestic violence. We know that 1 in 2 women will be in an abusive situation in their life. So while we're having wonderful fights and controversies about mandated AIDS testing, why don't we do something we can do very easily, and that is assess all women for domestic violence. The most important part, if you think whether it's in an ER or somebody's admitted to your floor with injuries or she comes into your office and you have, for whatever reason, your antenna go up, the most important thing to do is to separate that person, that woman usually, from her partner. Use your authority as a healthcare professional to say, you know, we really need to go in this room alone. You need to wait here. Because a batterer who has just inflicted these injuries on his victim will be the most sweet, loving, caring person you could ever hope. If you find yourself saying, gee, I wish my husband was like that, you've probably got yourself a battered woman there, okay? Because he's a charmer, all right, to the outside world. Separate her. And to reinforce what Myrna said, don't assume because somebody comes with her best girlfriend that this is indeed her neighbor who's helping her. It may well be her lesbian lover. Separate, always. Okay? The next thing you need to do when you get her alone is assure her of confidentiality. You are, as a healthcare professional, probably a mandated CPS report her. Let her know that right up front. Let her know that everything she tells you is completely confidential, with the exception of a child being hurt or neglected, and that you have to report. Let her know that you are not going to call the police, and if your hospital has a policy that says any assaults that come into the ER to be reported to the police department, rethink that policy. Look into it. Let her know it is between you and her, and that while you will document stuff in her medical records, that no one has access to her medical records except for her physician and her. Her husband cannot get her medical records. One of the things that we find that women are afraid of is, well, I didn't tell them what happened at the ER because I don't want it on paper. We say to them, go to the hospital, tell the truth about what happened. And nobody's going to see those records until you're ready for them to see those records. If 2, 3, 5 years from now you choose to try to maybe take criminal charges against your batterer, we're going to have some foundation. We're going to have some past records, right? But assure her that nobody's going to get at them. We have a couple myths in our society that battered women won't talk. That battered women just walk around. Every time a battered woman calls with a headache, every time a battered woman comes into the ER, every time a battered woman can't give you a reasonable response to your question, that is her way of saying, I want to tell you something, but I've got to trust you first. We also have a myth that battered women won't leave. And I think Myrna gave you some darn fine reasons why battered women cannot leave in many instances. But the reality is that 80% of women do eventually leave. But it's very important, as Dr. Schwartz said, that they leave with a good plan. That they leave thought out. Because if they leave at 3 in the morning without thinking about it, without, saying, I'm going to Mom's house, this is not a good plan. He knows where Mom lives. He will be at Mom's house. Further reinforced, he finds her, drags her home. One of the things that's very important when assessing or interviewing for domestic violence is to not show shock, not to show amazement. This is her everyday life, and while many of the things you hear are incredibly repulsive, you are a professional. Also, feel free to say, if you do choose to assess all women for battering, or you want to know how to get the conversation off the ground, start with, a lot of the women we see here at so-and-so, at Horton Hospital, are physically hurt by their husbands or boyfriends. Has this ever happened to you? There's a wonderful, real quick questionnaire in here that you can use, along with physical body language signs to look for. Real easy stuff. And she'll talk. One of the other things, don't use the term battered or abused. Many times we get hotline calls from women, does your husband abuse you? No. Does he hit you? Yes. Does he push you? Yes. Does he throw you down the stairs? Yes. Does he abuse you? No. And that is because that's a shameful thing that we have put on her. We have said, you are responsible for his violence. And it is much better to word it, does he do this? Does he do that? Not, is this done to you? Because he will do this to any female he's involved with. When you're interviewing for domestic violence, she's going to minimize. You need to pick up red flags. Does your husband hurt you? Well, he pushed me once. Now, if you want to close your eyes to this, you sure can, and you can pretend that she didn't say that. Well, if she tells you, very quiet voice, that he pushed me once, chances are he did a heck of a lot more. And that you should pursue that. Another way to ask a question is to say, tell me about your average argument with your partner. Everybody argues. Every couple argues. What's your average argument like? Does he always win? Does she always give in? Do dishes get broken? Do bones get broken? I can't reinforce enough to not be judgmental. And not being judgmental takes another form, which is to not say to yourself, he's from Scottsdale. He's from New Windsor. That doesn't happen there. She's from Tuxedo Park. Battering doesn't happen there. Okay. I know of a child who should still be taken away from both of his parents, but because they're upper middle class, CPS keeps saying, well, this can't happen. Guess what? Both parents are in the human services field. So you have to say, do away with those blinders. If a woman comes into your office and she's shabbily dressed and she doesn't have great hygiene practices, don't assume, look, she's going to be better. It doesn't work that way. The majority of the women that Orange County Safe Homes helps are middle class and upper middle class women. And the reason for that is those are the women that are most easy to isolate, as Myrna touched upon. If you live in the city of Newburgh or the city of Middletown, you know where your police department is. You know who your police department is. That's an accomplishment in Orange County. You know where the Department of Social Services is. You're never terribly far from a church. If you live in New Windsor, you live in Cuddybackville, what do you know about where things are? We frequently hear from women. One call I'll just never forget, but it's typical of other ones. My husband just moved me up here. I've lived in Maybrook for 3 weeks. I have no idea where the hell Maybrook is. He moved her up here. He moved her away from her family with the line of, honey, when we get away from your parents and my parents, everything will be fine. Okay? So that's very common. Look for women who don't know. When you look at them and you say, what's your phone number? And the woman does not know. Another red flag. It is also very important when you're not being judgmental to clarify to her, and I think it helps to clarify it to yourself. A battered woman can neither cause nor prevent the violence. She may think she can. He may think she can. Because they both want to believe that it's not him choosing to do this. But the reality is, if he wishes to become emotionally, sexually, or physically violent, he will act upon it. Period. A good example is a woman who called us up. She was in the hospital because her husband beat her over the head with the vacuum cleaner. He said the house is to be vacuumed every day. Well, that little way things happen, he changed that vacuum bag that morning before he went to work. He came home, he said, there's nothing in this vacuum bag, you didn't vacuum today, and he proceeded to beat her up. She gets discharged, she goes home, she calls us the next day to say that while recovering from a concussion, she did manage to vacuum. He beat her up again because she did not vacuum under the TV. That is what a batterer will find. They will find a reason. If you just had dinner on the table at 6 o'clock like I asked, is that too much to ask? If you were just a better wife, lover, mother, she can neither cause nor prevent. It's very important you state that to her. One of the things that you can offer her that could be the most valuable thing in the world is that telephone in that office. Battered women frequently cannot call from their own phone at home because the batterer will check the phone bill. And as you know, in Orange County, pretty much everything's a long-distance phone call. Orange County Safe Homes is too poor for an 800 number. Giving her the privacy to speak to the hotline in your office could be a godsend, literally. One of the other things that you provide to her as a healthcare professional is so important. It's what we provide at Safe Homes. You are a reflection of reality for her. Women are so shocked when they say, well, you know, he doesn't let me out. Can you come to my house? And we said, no, you live in a very dangerous place. We are not coming to your house. We'll meet you at the library, we'll meet you at the grocery store, but we're not coming to your house. You live in a dangerous place. She needs to hear that. How are the children affected? She will say, he never hits me in front of the children. You can say, unless you live in a really big place like on Dallas, those kids, they know what's going on. Okay? It's important for you to say that back to her. You're not putting her down. You're not telling her she's wrong. You're simply reframing the reality for her. Women will frequently say, he only hits me when he's drunk or high. Every woman who's ever said that to me upon further question, yes, he's hit me when he was sober. Drugs and alcohol do not cause domestic violence. They may intensify it. He may throw her against the wall a little harder than he meant to. But he meant to throw her against the wall. Another thing to be careful about when you're being judgmental or you're trying not to be judgmental is to assume frequently in relationships where one partner is physically dependent upon the other. Maybe she has multiple sclerosis, she has MD, something like that. We'd like to think that the husband is completely loving and takes care of her. In reality, these people are even more likely to be victims because they're less able to speak out. So while I personally would not care to think about the fact that people with multiple sclerosis who cannot even toilet themselves are being beaten up, are being tortured, one batterer, and this is Orange County, she has MS, he puts her in the bathtub, he puts snakes in the bathtub. Okay? So, and that's another thing with what Myrna said. When a woman, frequently the first thing they'll say is, please don't think I'm crazy. And you can again reframe for her, no, you are not crazy. The life you live is nuts, but you are not crazy. You are living with a very dangerous person. I would encourage you all to read this through immensely. There's some wonderful parts in it where you can give examples and exercisings exercises of reframing things for her, when she tries to minimize the violence, when she blames herself. The last thing I'd like to mention, and it's a controversy even within domestic violence programs. Does a battered woman have low self-esteem, or doesn't a battered woman have low self-esteem? First of all, any woman can find herself in a domestic violence situation. I have female cops who are battered. I have female clergy who are battered. I have female executives who are battered. Batterers do not batter on the first date. They are sweethearts. Many things in our society that's called romantic love are confused with battering. Oh, honey, we love each other so much that we don't need to hang out with other people. This is cool for 4 to 6 weeks. 6th week, he hits her. Who's she going to call? Her mother, who she hasn't talked to in 6 weeks because she's so in love? Her best friend, who she's ignored? Jealousy in our society is perceived as the ultimate. What a great compliment. Taken to an extreme, and not a very far extreme, you have a possessive, obsessed batterer who accuses her of having affairs all the time. Or just one woman, she's an 85-year-old, very religious Catholic woman swearing, he keeps saying I'm having affairs. I swear, I'm not having an affair. Okay. You have to throw out some reason. You have to say, you're going to try to, and she's going to try to make sense of what he's saying. And you can say to her, do not try to apply rational thought to him. Do not try to apply fair game to him. Because he doesn't play by those rules. He plays by whatever rules make him king of the hill. Period. I had a point before I went off on that. It's gone. Basically, I think it's really important that before anybody tries to intervene in a domestic violence situation, that you really look at what it means to you. It would be very unlikely that no one in this room had ever been battered themselves, had a sister, mother, aunt who was battered. It hits close to home. There's a wonderful book called When Love Goes Wrong. The first author's name is Ann Jones. And the reason it's a wonderful book is because it says everything that a domestic violence counselor wants to say to a battered woman and can't, simply because we don't have enough time. But it really analyzes in a very readable way all of society's reasons for choosing to ignore this. If you have any questions after reading this, if you would like us to come to your agency, your office, your whatever, we can do that. Okay? Do you guys need a break, or can we keep playing here? Oh, what a great group. We're going to keep playing. Okay. Our next speaker is Dave McDermott, who's from the Batterers Intervention Program. And Dave is going to speak about some things from the batterer's perspective. I try not, Dave very nicely takes on what is frequently called the male bashing end, because he's a man who can do that. Remember, not all men are batterers. We're not saying all men are batterers. We're talking about a portion of the population who chooses to use violence to control another person. So try to keep that in mind. Dave?
There is not a thing I could add to what has already been said regarding what happens to the victim, except that I just received the Biden report 3-4 weeks ago, which is a report that the Senate Judiciary Committee put out on 1 week in the life of America, the first week of September of 1992. And the reason I mention that is that Myrna said there are 70 women being killed every week in this country. This shows there are over 90 women being killed in this country every week as a direct result of domestic violence. I believe there were 18 women were killed in Orange County in the past little over a year as a direct result of domestic violence. And when people ask me why I came into this end of this program, that's why. I come in hoping and praying that we can stop the killing. killing part of domestic violence is actually a very small part of what goes on. Mahatma Gandhi defined violence as any attempt to impose your will on another is violence. I like that definition. All men do it. All men attempt to put their will on their partners. We do it in every day in every way. The things that we've been hearing about here are those things that have caused physical harm, have caused lifelong debilitation. The woman with MS, I've heard stories like that. That was another thing. My first awareness of what goes on in domestic violence was when I was in the Big Brother movement. I was 20 years old, and my little brother, his mother had MS. Where was his father? His father had moved out after spending 3 years of trying to convince that woman she should commit suicide. That is an act of violence. He didn't lay a hand on her. One of the most horrible cases of domestic violence that we've ever heard in the movement was my mentor in Rockland County told the story of a woman who she was counseling, said that she had gotten married to this wonderful, sweet man. They went on their honeymoon, and he said, how come you never asked me about my first wife? And she said, I didn't know you were married. And he said, well, I was. And she said, well, what happened to her? And he said, I killed her. He never had to lift his hand. She knew she could not do anything in that relationship. We in the Batterers Intervention Program work with the men who do the battering. Unhappily, we work with those men who have been caught and mandated to our program. That is really the tip of the iceberg. We have been doing this work in Orange County now for 2 years. This month actually is the second anniversary of the formation of a coalition that we started with Eileen and with our mentor in Rockland County and with a couple of the judges. We had a coalition breakfast to which we invited all 65 judges in this county, all of the police chiefs and all of the probation people and all of the people who work in social services. We were very fortunate. We had, I think, about 35 or 40 people attend that first breakfast before they even knew who we were. From that time to this, we have been able to bring together a coalition where the various agencies report to each other and to us on the men that end up in our program. As I say, all of the men, 90% of the men in our program have been mandated by the courts, either through probation or through DSS or CPS. They are told they must attend our program for 52 weeks. What we provide and our success has to do with the fact that the coalition exists, that battering is considered a crime. This is news. Up until, as Myrna said, 1984, up until 1984, battering wasn't even considered a crime. It was considered a domestic. It was something that most judges, most police try to stay away from. You can't go behind closed doors, and especially when you work through the systems that we have here in New York State, which is home rule all the way. Your village judges, in most cases, when a man appears before him for a domestic, he's a neighbor. He's a man that he doesn't want to put him behind bars. Besides, the woman probably brought it on herself. So they've been able to kind of hide this. But as there's been more and more awareness, and I'll mention briefly the Torrington case, where the city of Torrington, Connecticut was sued for not giving a woman protection. The city lost $3 million. They was awarded to Tracy Thurman, partly because a cop had stood there and watched her husband cut the nerve that made her a paraplegic, and then allowed it to go on further. So that when all of a sudden municipalities started to discover this is going to cost them money, then awareness started. And that's when police started going into training. As Dr. Schwartz mentioned, the New York State Office for the Prevention of Domestic Violence, and Myrna and safe homes, offer training for police throughout the state. And the program here in Orange County is really up and running now. Most police agencies have had some training. The problem is immense. The coalition that we are forming is very important. What we need to do is to keep this coalition going. Every county in the state is mandated to have a safe homes shelter. I don't think they care where the funding comes from, however, so everybody has to fend for themselves. There is no mandate in the state for a batterer's intervention program, and the clue or the key word is intervention. Our program intervenes between the man and his actions. There are only 6 intervention programs in the state of New York. 5 of them are funded, 1 of them is not, and we are the one that is not. About 3 years ago, the New York State Office for the Prevention of Domestic Violence, as well as the Department of, and I always get this wrong, Probation and Correctional Alternatives, put out a request for proposals for groups to start an intervention program. They had enough money to fund 5. They funded 5 that were already up and running because they really wanted the pilot programs to work. My partner and I came on the scene in Orange County, well, as they say, a little over 2 years ago. We didn't even know about that funding. But we were led to believe that there would be funding down the road from the New York State Office for the Prevention of Domestic Violence, and we worked very closely with them. We worked closely with the person that Dr. Schwartz mentioned, Carla DiGirolamo, and we have gotten all kinds of encouragement. We get all of the information that is engendered. We contribute to the information that's engendered in that program. The problem is the New York State Office for the Prevention of Domestic Violence, just like every other New York State office for whatever, has completely run out of money. So that we, even though we feel our program has been totally successful, we now have well over half the jurisdictions in Orange County mandating men to our program. We can't afford to do it anymore. We know the awareness is out there. We know that we've been able to convince various judiciary that this is a valuable and important thing, and from what everybody else has said here so far, I hope the importance is sunk in on everyone. This is something that is absolutely needed. If we could get to everybody who does abuse, this would even be better. But sad to say, we can only go after those who have committed violent abuse. I think what I'm going to do is stop. Well, there was one thing that I cannot stress enough, and that is in your packets there is the wheel. And that wheel has to do with tactics and behaviors of power and control. And it is those tactics and behaviors that men use in their relationships. In this morning's paper, there was an article in the magazine section aimed at kids. The question was, why does my daughter give, this is written by a woman to this syndicated doctor who writes this article. Why does my daughter give me nothing but static and grief every single time I ask her to do something? Whereas my husband can walk in the door, tell her to do it, and just like that, it's done. Now, this noted psychologist goes on to state that men know how to run the house and women don't. I mean, basically, that's it in a nutshell. This is a man writing this article. He even goes so far as in the last paragraph to say, her husband, meanwhile, regards all this psychobabble, and that basically has to do with the way the woman is a caring, nurturing soul and works very delicately and very wonderfully with the child. The child is scared to death of her father. This is supposedly aimed at people so that they know that this is what the father does is right and what the mother does is wrong. And if you pick it up and read it, you will see that this is the kind of thing we run into all the time. As Myrna said in the women's magazines, this is how you please your husband. Now, one other thing that I picked up in yesterday's Times was an article about one of our the other batterers intervention program in New York, which is funded. We work very closely together. This reporter picked up something that it just disturbed me. There's a little story here about one of the men in John Afani's program, and he didn't mean to beat her up and all that stuff. But then he went through John's program, and he was more aware of those tactics and behaviors of power and control. And the woman is saying what a wonderful guy he is, because now he recognizes when he's going to hit, so he gets up and goes out the door. So then she's quoted here. He came back. He came home and didn't speak, says Eve. He went to bed. I said, wow, he's really trying. I went in the room and I said, my God, how could a person who sleeps so sweetly have had such a bad temper? I kissed him. He woke up and I said, thank you so much for what you did. He's changing, and I seen it. She's thanking him for not beating her.
Thank you, Dave. I did a bad thing before. I didn't read the program that I wrote. But I think actually this will work out, because one of the things that Dave emphasized is the role of the criminal justice system in taking an effective response to domestic violence. One of the roles that you play as healthcare professionals is to look at documentation, and to also, for the bigger picture, to look at how your medical facility chooses to respond to domestic violence. We're very fortunate this evening to have with us Glenn Plotsky, who's an attorney with a practice in Fort Jervis, who probably doesn't know he's here tonight. He's also a former ADA. His job there was frequently to prosecute batterers, so he can let you know what he needs in order to assist a woman in trying to prosecute and end the violence. Glenn Plotsky.
I don't sue doctors or hospitals or nurses. As a prosecutor, and as now a defense attorney, as an attorney who does divorce litigation, custody litigation, support litigation, one of the things that I can tell you as a prosecutor, the first thing I looked at was, where are the medicals? A woman comes in, charges somebody with assault in the 3rd degree, assault in the 2nd degree, assault in first, rape, any of those types of crimes. One of the first things the DA is going to look at is the medical record. Now, I'm not going to stand here and tell you that if you wrote a little neater, it would be easier, because everybody will acknowledge that that's the case. Your scribbling is difficult, but you learn that HX is history and PT is patient and the different FX is fracture. You'll learn the abbreviations, and suddenly some of these things start to take shape. And one of the things that I remember always looking into was the ER report. Looking at the ambulance sheet, the one that they give the ER. Now, as a prosecutor, I look for discrepancies to try to figure out what questions to ask the victim, so I could make sure I understood how to protect her, in quotes, protect her, from the defense attorney who would say she doesn't know what happened because she told the ambulance people this, she told the ER that, she told the attending physician up and the nurses upstairs a third version. She doesn't know what happened. Now you can't prosecute. As a prosecutor, I used to look for those discrepancies to say, well, there's more similarities than differences. And to work with the victim, to try to figure out at what point and for what reasons did it change. I have to comment on a couple of things that have been said by the other speakers. And one of the things that Eileen always says something funny, and she said that bit about, he never hits me in front of the kids, and that it doesn't impact the kids. And Eileen's reaction was, well, unless you live in a place the size of Dallas or on Dallas, it's got impact. Well, I had a client whose husband brought her outside and raped her repeatedly. Now, these were husband and wife. My question was, custody dispute. I represent this woman. How do I show where he brought her outside the home that there's an impact on the children? You tell me. 3 o'clock in the morning. He's outside raping her. Who's watching the kids? There's the impact. There's the importance. There's the ability to be able to tie that in. Marital rape became effective in 1984. Okay. The ER physician, the ER nurse is going to be one of the first people, if this person, this victim has contact with, you're going to see the bruising. You're going to see the emotional response. You're going to see, did your husband do it? No. As they turn away. Now, you know from dealing with people on a daily basis, there are certain things, and we do this in jury selection. Can you tell us, have you had the experience of asking people what happened, and you get 2 versions of exactly the same incident, and yet somehow you can discern which of the 2 people was telling the truth? You can do it with your kids. You can do it with employees. You can do it with coworkers. And how do you do it? You do it by applying common sense, by things that you've been doing your whole life. I mean, if I ask my 2 sisters what happened to my car, it's got a big scratch on it. One of you was driving. They both say, she was. Okay? Well, eventually, through their mannerisms or whatever, I'm going to know which one told the truth. And the same type of analysis can be performed on somebody that you really haven't met before. Jurors do it all the time. Lawyers do it. Judges do it. Doctors do it. You can tell by the way that the person holds themselves and the way that they respond to the inquiry whether or not they're being truthful. In terms of observations and documentation, if somebody says, I fell on the step, and they have a handprint on their body, either somebody helped them fall on the step, or they're lying about having fallen in the first place. There are, to a certain degree, consistent versus inconsistent. Is the story being told, is the narration from the patient consistent with the injuries? This does not mean that if it's not consistent, you immediately begin grilling the person to try to get to the truth. But what it does mean is that maybe you make the notation on your paperwork that says, handprint on the shoulder. Seems inconsistent with patient stating she fell on the steps. And leave it at that. And let somebody else figure out, or at least have it there to be able to figure out down the road when the woman turns up dead. They can go back to the medical records and perhaps put 2 and 2 together and say, hey, maybe something happened. I take exception to Eileen's statement that if you're in a hospital in the ER and the guy won't leave the woman's side, it's because he's a batterer. If my wife were in the hospital, you'd be hard-pressed to get me out of the room. Probably because she would be holding me there as much as because I wouldn't want to leave. But it is true. The batterer won't want you to be alone with her. And the reason for that is because he can't control then her responses. Now, you can, as Eileen suggested, and it's probably an excellent suggestion, to say, look, I need to be alone with her. You'll be able to tell within just a moment or 2 the difference, because her whole affect will change, her whole affect will change. Her emotional state, everything will change. If it changes, keep them apart. If it changes in a negative direction, well, maybe she really needs him, and maybe he's not a bad. Okay? These are some of these will be decisions that you'll have to make, and it'll be a gut reaction on your part. But I know from having been in the ER on a few occasions myself, having been a former EMT, having some involvement with the medical profession, that it's not always just the patient sitting on the stretcher in the ER. There are oftentimes other people who go in with them. I'm not suggesting that you have to have monitors next to the bed so you can tape record conversations. On the other hand, if you happen to be walking in and the woman is there with her arm all, crumpled up and guarding it, and you happen to hear her say to her friend, "Yeah, I can't believe he did that." And then when you say, "So what happened?" And she says, "Well, I fell on the stairs." There's something wrong there. There's something wrong. Now again, do you have to play the detective? Probably not. But again, you should probably make the notation that says, overheard conversation indicating somebody did something, and then she said she fell on the stairs and denied anybody else is involved. It's a question. Now, at this point, as Mr. McDermott pointed out, municipalities and police departments have been held accountable. It happened in Connecticut with the Thurman case. It's happened, and in Orange County, in no small part due to Myrna's involvement, many of the police agencies now have what are called pro-arrest policies. Basically, what it means is if they come into the scene on a domestic violence situation, they must arrest. And let the DA and the defense attorney work it out later if the victim doesn't want to cooperate. Or if she does. Either way, the DA and the defense attorney now have to be involved because they've got a pro-arrest. It's basically get the guy out of there, get the batterer away, and then let the judicial system deal with it. At this point, there is no case law, or I'm not even sure that there's a pending lawsuit that I could point to where someone has tried to hold a doctor, hospital nurse, or any health-related facility liable or responsible for failing to take steps to prevent the violence, to document it properly, or to prevent the reoccurrence. By the same token, in no small part due to lawyers, and things happen, it is distinctly possible that in the next few years, that will be a new field. And hospitals and doctors will have to take kind of self-protective measures so that at that point, it may become more compulsory for the doctors, nurses, and hospitals to make these types of notations. As I've stated, I think that it couldn't hurt you to make the notation, okay? Safe Homes has a really nice light blue brochure, and it's got their phone number. Actually, it's white with blue lettering now. It's got the phone numbers on the front, and in fact, the new ones even have the Port Jervis branch office numbers on them. I keep a whole stack on my desk, and most people, it's like, I think Eileen was the one who said, don't ask whether they've been abused. Don't ask if they've been battered. Does he hit you? Does he keep you away from your friends? Does he stop you from using the phone? I cannot tell you how many clients I've had who have said, I really would like to talk to you, or I'll ask for them, first thing that you do, name, address, and phone number. Well, the name's no problem. The address, as a general rule, the response is, well, what are you going to send me? And depending upon what I tell them, they'll say, well, could you send it to my mom's, or my father's, or my friend's, and forget about it when it comes to a phone number. There's just no way. At which point, if there's contemplated litigation, and I know that I'm going to need to speak to this person, perhaps on short notice, I'll say to him, and I'll make a notation right on my notes, secretary to call. And if I've got the notations in my notes next to a phone number, secretary to call, it means, number one, that it's got to be a female voice that calls the house. And number two, that female voice will not truthfully mention where she's calling from. Okay? If it is a person with school-age kids, somebody from the school, and it's not a crisis. It was just a question about something which happened in the cafeteria, and It involved the kid not wanting to drink his milk. I mean, you can come up with something which is believable, okay? Why don't I call and use a fake name and a fake number? Because any guy can do that. And a batterer is just as likely to assume that I am the person with whom his wife is having an affair, which of course she really isn't, but he's liable to assume that and beat the heck out of her anyway. Okay? Emotional battering, I can't begin to describe to you the number of cases I have where I listen to them, and at the end of the consultation, whether they decide to hire me or not, I give them three things. I give them my business card, and tell them not to leave it in their pocketbook or in their pocket, but to give it to a friend, memorize the number, and eat it. I don't care what you do with it, just don't let your husband find the business card. I give them the Safe Homes brochure, and I give them the Safe Homes business card, basically the same instructions. In terms of your involvement in the criminal justice system as one of the first people that will contact the victim, there is no such thing as mandatory or mandated reporting at this point. One of the big concerns, I know because I dealt with it both as a DA and occasionally now I deal with it. Oh, do I have to go to court? I've got 15 patients that morning. Or I've got a surgical procedure that morning and now you want me in there in the afternoon. How much time is this going to take? The answer is significantly less than in the mandated reporting situation of child abuse. Part of the reason for that is because any adult is competent to testify. Well, most adults are competent to testify. Children, as a general rule, are not. It's a whole lot more difficult to qualify a child victim of abuse as a witness who can testify on their own behalf as to what mommy, daddy, stepfather, whoever did, than it is to qualify a 25-year-old woman whose husband, boyfriend, intimate other, significant other, did something to her. The difficulty at that point is not in qualifying the witness, it's in getting the witness to cooperate. Without a cooperative adult witness, the DA is a whole lot more likely to toss the case and therefore not involve the health professional community than with a child victim. See, the child, because they may or may not be able to testify anyway, there has to be other evidence, which can then be used regardless of what the child expresses they would like to see happen. With an adult victim, there's a whole lot less corroboration sought. And therefore, if that adult witness decides not to cooperate, it may be a whole lot more difficult for the DA to prove. In any event, I can tell you that as both a prosecutor, defense attorney, as a matrimonial attorney, the notes and observations which you make have an incredible impact on the ability to go forward, to defend, or to otherwise, just the impact that they have on the legal cases can go so far. You can make a very significant difference. And I guess as the people from Safe Homes and the other speakers have asked you to, I'd ask you to make that difference, and make those observations, make those notes. And thank you.
What I'd like to do now, it's about a quarter of, is, I think, Dave, you pretty much covered what your services were. Safe Homes brochure is in front of each of your packets. There's also a number of them out on the desk. Take bunches. Call for more. There's also a little brown handbook called Handbook for Battered Women. It used to be called Handbook for Beaten Women. Really lovely. Then the state changed it. It's really a wonderful resource to give to women, for you to read yourself, so you know what a woman's getting into when she chooses to involve the legal community or the judicial system in any way. Know that Safe Homes does have a 24-hour hotline with both those numbers on the front of the brochure. There is no such thing as an inappropriate referral to Safe Homes. If we are not the right place, we will find the right place. Okay? If you want us to come in and do trainings, we can do that. If you want us to come to meet a person, a patient, let's say, we can come to her on a neutral, safe territory. So we will meet her in the doctor's office, we will meet her at the library, we will meet her at the school nurses. School nurses are just like something from heaven, they're wonderful. We get more referrals from school nurses. Okay. What I'd like to do now is use this last 10 minutes for questions for any of the speakers. So now somebody has to raise their hand and ask a question. The next step. Yes?
Hi, I have a question for Mr. Jervis. This program has been, we've been operating for 2 years. What do you see success in the men that have been through it? Have, you know, do you think it's have their attitudes changed, or
We,
is there any way to say about that?
it's impossible to tell how a men's attitudes change. Eileen has described the men who go into the emergency room with the women they've just beaten.
I mean, after they've been through the program.
I'm sorry.
After they've been through.
What we are concerned with is their awareness. We go through that wheel that you have in your folder, come up with the word somehow, is our curriculum. We go through it, and what we do is to teach what the tactics and behaviors of power and control are. That's our job. Their job is to learn them. After 52 weeks, we discover they're using the word. That's comforting to us because at least they've learned the word. What they're doing with that knowledge is totally their responsibility. We do measure our success in terms of the number of referrals we're getting from different jurisdictions. We are most concerned with the criminalization of this crime. We're most concerned that society become aware of the fact that it is a crime, and it's not anything to be laughed at, that everything that's been said here tonight is probably the most serious thing you're going to hear in a long time. And that's what we're concerned about, that the judges no longer look upon this as a domestic. You know, as long as the wife has the dinner on the table at 6, then everything's going to be hunky-dory. As Glenn mentioned, that there are, how many protest agencies are there now? There are I understand there are 26 police agencies. 8 of them have pro-arrest policies. About 8, yeah, have pro-arrest. That means there are a lot more that need a pro-arrest policy. It's not mandated in the state yet. I mean, if the state passed a law that mandated an arrest or made a pro-arrest policy, it would make the victims' lives a lot easier. Oh, that reminds me, 1 second. When we do an intake with the men who are sent to us through probation or the courts or whomever, we have a form that it's a policy agreement. In that policy agreement, we state that we are going to notify Safe Homes about this. We also state that Safe Homes may get in touch with the victim. That gets the victim off the hook, that she has not initiated that contact. And we also have a statement there that this man cannot manipulate his victim to get himself off the hook in the court. That if he is to try to do anything with the court, he must do it himself. He cannot do it through the victim. So that in that, we're constantly concerned with it.
Anything else? I just wanted to quickly add that people perceive a domestic violence program as a shelter. Calling a domestic violence program has somehow become synonymous with going into a shelter. That is not true. In 1992, Safe Homes helped over 1,200 of Orange County's battered women. 80% of those women never saw our shelter. Either we worked with them to go through family court or criminal court to get the batterer removed from the home. We helped her pick up and disappear. Nobody at the other end of that hotline call is going to tell her what she has to do. They're simply going to give her choices and information. And it's real important to let her know, because when she hears domestic violence program, she's hearing picking up my life and leaving. And I wouldn't call that number. That would be real scary. Did I see another hand? Yes?
Do you offer, I was running a little bit late, but for high school students, do you offer a program?
Yes, Myrna goes into both junior high and high schools. Actually, we have a curriculum for kindergarten through 12th grade. We thought we would go into the junior highs and do prevention, and we were wrong. We were too late. We've seen battering as young as 12.
It's only in Orange County, though?
Yes, but if you want to know what other counties have programs, you can call us up and we can link you with Duchess Ulster Sullivan. Pretty much every county now has a domestic violence program. Anything else? Okay, I'm going to take this last 5 minutes, not the whole 5 minutes, I swear, to say, I remembered that thought before. There's a great controversy over whether or not battered women have low self-esteem. And the assumption is, yes, she has low self-esteem. One of the things they have found is that battered women, in fact, have wonderful self-esteem, and that's why they're still alive. If I'm holding a 50-ton bag of sand over Carla's head, and I have the rope, Carla's going to dress how I want her to dress. She's going to talk how I want her to talk. She's going to do whatever I want her to do because I can kill her in a second. And it is only when a woman gets to the point of being suicidal and saying, I just wish he would kill me and get it over with fun. But the majority of the women who come to reach out to medical sources for help, to call our hotline, to do whatever, to go to court, are the most immensely motivated women you'd want to meet. They are phenomenal. Yeah, they might go back 1 or 2 times, but they are the experts. They know what's best. So I think it's something that we need to think about when we classify. Again, it's another way to say she's responsible, she got herself into this mess, rather than saying, why isn't he in jail?
And also, another thing is that when she was talking about, Elaine was talking about, how she is alive, 75% of the more serious injuries occur once a woman has done something. Sustaining that relationship looks a hell of a lot better than being dead. And that's the decision she has to work with.
The last thing I'd like to do is thank Baby from the auxiliary and Ingrid from Horton Hospital. All of you who showed up with me.
Thank you very much. I would just like to thank all our guests here tonight. It was a very famous program. And I would like also to mention that we have a seminar for the community coming up, and that will be on Thursday, March 11th from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m., also here at the auditorium. And please get the message out because it's very important that we have this program for the community also. Thank you very much.